So this is my room, and I work in one room. I don't have a live room. I've got a machine room for all the noisy stuff, and I like to record everything in the same room with all the equipment. Actually, I used to have a live room, and I used to have to find I took more and more stuff into the live room with me so that I could work to picture, like a screen to see the picture, and some sort of remote, and it was all getting very complicated. And I thought, why didn't I just make my main room quiet, and then I can work in that, which is what I've done. So this is it. There's lots of stuff, as you can see. There's drums here, full kit, which is really a legacy from my old assistant, who was a drummer. And so I had a tom and some cymbals, which I used to use, and he set it up more like a kit, and it was all sort of bought in bits from eBay finds, a lot of them in America. So there's a vintage scratch tom and lots of lovely cymbals that came from Istanbul, and that's all very useful. And then over here are the synths, and there used to be a few more there, but I sort of pared it down to the things that I really love. So Juno 60 goes right back to my childhood. I'm just a sucker for that. Doesn't do a million things, but what it does, it just does brilliantly well. And a load of the Korg Volca things so that I can sound a bit like the kids do. And then an old Korg MS-20, which actually isn't old. It's one of the new kit ones, which I built myself, which seemed like a really good idea at the time. And took a very long time and was probably a little more work than it really needed to be. But that's great, and that's going through the Roland Space Echo, which I will play you in a minute. And then on that side of the room, there's the piano, which I can tell you about in a minute, which is lovely. And then the running machine, which is very important, which I'll also come back to in a minute, and various guitars hanging on walls. So that's the sort of basis of it. It's set up in 5.1. I work in 5.1 all the time. I know a lot of composers think that that's a bit pointless and that it makes more sense just to work in stereo, but I tend to mix here at the end. And for me, it's much easier to be working in 5.1 and mix it down to stereo later than it is to be working in stereo and then try and mix up into 5.1. That said, a lot of the time I do monitor in stereo, because when I switch to the 5.1 monitors, suddenly everything sounds really big and lovely, which is nice. So what else can I tell you? Well, going back to the drums, everything, you'll notice there's a lot of mics and mic stands around. Everything's mic'd up all the time, and I have a template with absolutely everything ready to go. My template used to be about 500 tracks with loads and loads of MIDI, lots of Vienna ensembles on PC slaves. I still have the slaves, but I got a bit bored of working that way. I only had my orchestral stuff on there, but I found that I was filling up all the drives and filling up all the channels, and then I didn't add anything new. And Spitfire, in their wisdom, keep bringing out lots of new lovely libraries, and it takes so long to change something in my template that I decided just to stop and start afresh and just use smaller things. I use a lot of the ensemble patches now from Sable and Albion and things like that. So that saves a lot of time, and it just means each project I'm slightly fresher than I was when I was just using a template all the time. But there is a template that I'll show you in a minute. It's in Pro Tools for drums, for the piano, for the backline, the guitars and bass amps that are down there. And there was a hammered dulcimer where the running machine is, but something had to give. So what else can I tell you about? Speaker system is Barefoots. I love the Barefoots. They sound utterly amazing. I went into a music shop one day to buy some headphones and saw them, listened to them, and it was the biggest mistake I ever made, because I now have a whole 5.1 system of those. But they do sound absolutely incredible. Interestingly, if you're thinking about monitoring, if you at all can, you should try them in the room. I tried loads and loads of speakers here. I went through phases where I wasn't sure the Barefoots were working particularly well, and I tried ATCs, which I loved. The ATC 25s were amazing in here, but the room's quite big. It's about 30 square meters, and they don't quite fill it, which is why I think they've brought out the new ones, which are slightly bigger. but they sound beautiful. I tried the Focal SM9s, almost bought those. Funnily enough, we did a load of tests. They were the flattest in the room, but there was something about the tweeter that didn't quite work for my ears, but I know lots of other people absolutely love them. I almost went for those. I've always wanted to try the Quested 2108s, really just because Hans Zimmer has them, and that's as good a reason as any. I haven't got around to actually trying them, but I think one day I might find myself getting a set of those as well, just for something else to listen to. But the Barefoots are fantastic for now, really fairly flat, and all the engineers that come in and mix here, I usually get one of the chaps from Air, either Jake Jackson or Rupert Coulson, and they come in, sit here, do the mixes, and that works brilliantly for me because it means that if I have to open something up later, it's all here, and everything that they did in or out of the box, I've got all the plugins, I've got all the hardware, and I can just rework a cue, which happens quite a lot, which is really nice to me. So get the mixes done quite early and then just rework things. I can also use the mixes for templates for subsequent episodes or anything else. So that's the monitoring. It's the big ones up front, but I got the slightly smaller ones for the rears, simply because I couldn't really afford to have the big ones as well at the back, and those came up on offer, and I was a sucker. I took them, and one day they'll probably make their way to my home studio, and then I'll replace them with the big ones. So that's speakers. As you can see, I'm working in Pro Tools. I've got just about every DAW there is. It's not completely true, but close to every DAW. It feels like it. I like all of them for different things, but Pro Tools is by far my favourite. One of the things I've done over the last few years is try to streamline the process, or the processes that I go through when I'm writing, to utilise my time the best that I can, so that I spend the time writing and not exporting things and importing things. And as you'll know, if you do any work with real orchestras, or if you mix anywhere else, if you're working in, say, Logic or Cubase or whatever, you have to export everything into Pro Tools, go into the recording session, record in Pro Tools, export it all back out into Cubase if you want to do any more MIDI work, and then export it all back again into Pro Tools for the mix. And it seemed to me I was taking an awful lot of time doing that, and I could cut out the middleman by just working in 5.1 stems all the time. I don't have to do any exporting or importing. I just do that when I'm ready. I print, and then I take it to the session, record the strings or whatever I'm doing, and bring it back, import those tracks, and mix. It's really quick, and it saves me days of time across a series. So that's why I work in Pro Tools. I also just really like it as an environment to work in. It's probably the least depressing colour-wise, which I know might sound a bit bizarre, but actually, when you're working on a screen all day long, it's nice if it looks vaguely attractive. And I find a lot of the others quite dour in their colour schemes. So that's Pro Tools, and I'll show you a bit more about the template in a minute. Going back to the microphones, as I say, everything is mic'd up, ready to go. And I've got a load of preamps, which you can see over here. So love my lunchbox. A couple of APIs, a couple of Neve 1073s, a Neve 88, which is lovely, sounds just like the desk at Air. Cartec, which honestly I chose slightly randomly. I tried a whole load of other things for the guitar amp, couldn't decide which I like best, and I quite like the colour of the Cartec. I quite like these little yellow knobs. It's very nicely made, sounds lovely. So that's that. And then in the rack, there's a whole load more. So a couple of these big APIs, which I just love. They're just fantastic for everything. They make everything sound big, punchy, warm, but not overly coloured. Just absolutely lovely. And the DAV is fantastic as well, and really good value. The drums are going through, the overheads are going through a Valley People Dynamite, which squashes the life out of them on purpose. And the TL's on the kick, and I've got a sub on the kick, which we actually made. I say we, me and my assistant, between us, somehow managed to make this. So it's an old cone from an NS10. You will have seen these probably. They do them a lot in America, less so over here, and you can actually buy something that's similar. That just gets all the sub, and then there's a condenser inside there that's picking up the kick at the front, the pedal. But I have to say, a lot of the time I just use the overheads because, which is a pair of 184s, because I quite like a natural sound. And sometimes I actually use the mics that are over there and just pull them into the middle of the room and pick it up from a bit further away just to get a much more natural sound. And these are great for your big sort of Hollywood toms and things, which are so boring to program if you want to make them sound real, but and they ring on for ages. It just doesn't sound like that, I find, when I use samples. I mean, I've got lots and lots of libraries. Obviously, I love the Spitfire hand simmer libraries. They sound great, but it's just a lot quicker for me to go. And it just works. And if I want a cymbal roll, and also late at night when I'm a bit bored or I need a little break, I can always pretend I'm Pharrell and knock out a little groove. So that's the drums and pre's. Very little in the way of compression or anything. I mean, there's the Valley People and the TL. I tend to go in as clean as possible, do everything after the event, just try and get a nice clean sound with a short signal path. So at the moment I'm using the UAD Apollo as an interface. I was using HDX, but I really like the UAD plugins, and I thought I'd try a simplified setup. So this is a kind of interim setup at the moment. It's going to change, and it's changed from what it was only a few months ago. So a few months ago it was HDX on an old Mac Pro. I'm waiting for the new Mac Pros to come. They haven't come yet as of making this, and hopefully by the time you see this they might have done. I could really do with one with at least 12 cores and lots of memory. This is running on an iMac at the moment, which was an experiment to see if it would work. It'll probably end up being an assistant rig, and it's fine, but I'm really pushing it. It doesn't have enough cores, I think, to really handle the number of tracks I use. And I mean, in my template, when it's 5.1 with 5 stems, I've got 2 reverbs on each stem, so that's 10 outer verbs running in 5.1 before you even start, and then there's loads of other things going on in there as well. So it's pretty stressed, although actually if you look at the CPU usage, it's actually not registering very much, but that spikes very quickly on this setup. I've tried to reduce that as much as possible by going completely SSD. So these are all Samsung, just the standard SSDs, not the Pros. I think the jury's out a little bit on which to go for. I know the guys up at Air Studios did some tests and they found that the Pros had functionality that they didn't need and that they thought that these were fine. So I thought if it's good enough for Air, it's good enough for me. These are the Blackmagic boxes, which you'll probably know, which you just slot these in. So each one of these is a terabyte. The top two, that one's my recording drive, that's my movie drive. So I can keep those separate when I'm working to picture. And these 4 are in a RAID array, which means they're super quick. I'm getting over 1,000 megabits out of that, which is pretty quick. And so that's that. I guess it'd be interesting to maybe look at some of the backline and other stuff that's lying around. So there's a little lap steel guitar, which is tuned in something funny. Well, major scale. And that's a lovely little thing which came from Canada, and somebody came and did a session for me and had something similar, and I just loved it. Can't play lap steel very well, but who cares? Look at it. And over here is all the guitar stuff. I don't know if you can see all this. So there's a Vox AC15 there, and I bought that to go with the Johnny Marr Jaguar that's hanging up on the wall, which I bought only really because of Inception. And anyone who's watching this probably knows the soundtrack from Inception and knows why I bought the Johnny Marr guitar. And that's going through an Ego Wampler, which is just the most stunning compressor for guitars and makes me sound really half competent, which is amazing. The TC Corona chorus, which I never switch on because it makes me sound like I'm stuck in the 80s, but it's lovely if you want to sound like you're stuck in the 80s. And the TC Flashback, which is an amazing delay. I've also got an old Memory Man Deluxe down here, which takes me back to my old band days, which I love, but as you can see, isn't plugged in because it's a little bit noisy, but may get unretired again soon. There's the Mark bass combo for the bass, which sounds amazing. I heard it in the shop and I bought it on a bit of a whim. I kind of wish I'd bought the 1x15 now, because the 2x whatever that is, 8 I think, is perhaps a little bit impractical because you can obviously only mic up one cone. That said, it sounds amazing. My clarinet's here. I play lots of things like saxophone and a bit of trumpet and things. I don't have them out all the time because they just start to annoy me if they're out, and I tend to not use them for ages. And actually, if I have to get them, then it makes me think about using them in a way that might be useful. This is a lovely little charango, which actually belongs to Sam Sim, who also did a Creative Crib recently, which he lent to me. He's in the same building here. He's sort of through that wall and down a floor, but I don't think he can hear me, although I do try and turn the sub up loud enough, so you never know, he might be able to hear me. This is my go-to microphone, which I use for pretty much everything other than the things that you see are already mic'd up. So this is an AEA KU4. It's kind of a remake of the old RCA KU3. One of the chaps downstairs has one of the originals, and we keep meaning to put them side by side to compare them, but I have to say I don't really have any great motivation to hear how it compares because it sounds incredible. Everything just comes to life when it's recorded through this. My clarinet sounds the best it's ever sounded. It's woody, it's full, it's present. It's just great on everything. So I use it for cellos, if I do a cello in here, violin, all my guitars, the acoustic guitars that is, literally anything, trumpet. It's just phenomenal. And I always put it through the Neve 88 for that sort of Neve sound. It's not too coloured like the 1073s, which are a bit warmer, a little more saturated. It's just really clear but beautiful. And I don't leave it plugged in because apparently it can stretch the ribbon if you leave it in too long. That's the only unidirectional ribbon, as far as I'm aware, that's available. And it's utterly phenomenal. Hideously expensive. They actually did me a deal on it, but it's still hideously expensive. So that's that. On the piano, these are the Browner VM1s, which are going through the 1073s. So that's their valves, the valve mics, so they're pretty warm, really great detail, and the Neves give them even more warmth. They're set up in mid-side at the moment, which my assistant really wanted to do, and one of my friends, Tom Fuller, was always going on about how it should be done in mid-side. I had them mic'd up before, sort of like this, which I still think sounded better, but it meant that things went out of phase in the middle quite randomly. It was really hard to know if, you know, one note would be out of phase, the next note would be fine, the other side would be fine. It's quite hard to know at any point what you were playing, if that was going to be in phase or not. So this is great. If you don't know how mid-side works, basically that one is pointing at the mid, and this one up there is pointing both ways at the sides, and use a little plug-in. I'm using the Waves plug-in, and you can bring up the amount of that, so it starts in mono, and as you bring up this, it just gets wider. It's very clever, especially for pop music if you want to sit it in the track. For film and TV stuff, which I do, I prefer a very wide sound, and so it's generally up wide anyway. And it doesn't quite give me the width I used to get when it was either side. So I think very soon I'm going to experiment with putting it back the way it was. This is a lovely little piano. It doesn't look much, but there is a bit of a story to this. It belonged to my wife's cousin, who was a chap called Dmitry Chomkin. And if you don't know Dmitry Chomkin's music, you should Google him. He wrote something like 150 film scores. Absolutely incredible guy, amazing composer, real old school. Started probably first movie around about 1930, and probably last movie around about, I don't know, 70s, something like that. His films include things like Giant with James Dean, most of James Dean's films, in fact, most of John Wayne's films. There's a whole row of them over here, actually, so I don't have to remember everything. He did Dial M for Murder. He did Strangers on a Train for Hitchcock. He did The Old Man and the Sea, which won an Oscar. I think it might have been won in 2 Oscars for Best Original Song as well. He also did It's a Wonderful Life, which is a classic film, and many, many other films. So this belonged to him. He died quite a long time ago, but his widow is also our cousin, and she very, very kindly asked me if I'd like it. Literally the day before I was about to buy an incredibly expensive alternative, and she didn't know I was going to buy a piano, but I was literally about to buy one, and she said, don't suppose you'd like Dimitri's old upright, would you? The obvious question was, yes, how soon can I get it? It sounds lovely, and it's just a wonderful thing with a wonderful history. I don't think he ever wrote any film scores on it, but he used to practice it every day, and he'd originally been a concert pianist and harboured desires to sort of go back to the concert stage at the end of his life, and so he practiced a couple of hours every day, and it's just a lovely thing to have with that history, plus it sounds lovely. One of the films that Dimitri wrote was The Guns of Navarone, and this little thing was actually featured on the soundtrack, and I think it might have even been in the film, but I haven't watched it recently, so I'm not completely sure. But it was on the soundtrack, and again, lovely thing to have. Haven't used it on anything yet, but I'm working up to it. Lots of other little things to play with around here. There's the bass ukulele, which sounds really nice just on its own, but it also plugs in. It's got incredible bass for something so small. Lovely rubber strings. That's great fun to play with. My baton, which is very good for when I'm doing orchestral scores and I can pretend that I'm a conductor. Anyone that's ever played for me will tell you that I'm the worst conductor in the entire world. However, as I'm usually paying for the session, they all sit there very politely and pretend that it's all okay. And usually I only have one job, which is to let them know that we're changing from, I don't know, 3/4 into 6/4, and I can't beat 6 anyway. And basically the whole thing falls apart usually at that moment, but they just listen to the click and everything works out fine. So that's good, but it's nice for me to stand around here when there's no one looking. I won't do it now, and just pretend that I can actually conduct. So that's that. There's a C48 here, which is lovely for acoustic guitars and vocals and things like that. Don't use it very much, but lovely thing. And then this is the desk area where there's a few more toys, and I'll show you a bit about my template. Actually, before I do that, I should also just say there's a really nice Roland V piano under here, gathering dust, which used to be my main keyboard, but it's been replaced by the Dupfer, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And the point of the running machine is, apart from obviously being an opportunity to keep fit, if you work in telly, you'll know that you constantly get sent recuts, and if you've done something, you know, you worked on a program, it's an hour long, they send you a new cut, you kind of have to watch it, but it's really annoying because you can't multitask anything else, well, not successfully, I find, and I feel compelled to sit and spend an hour watching this whenever it comes through and hating myself for not being able to do anything else. So now I can go for a run and watch it. It's pretty much the only thing I can do and concentrate. I haven't had any accidents yet, although I had some near misses when trying to concentrate and forgetting how fast I'm going. But it is a really nice way to get a bit of exercise, do something else, and also do your work. And it's quite nice if I ever had any time off, which I don't, I could watch a film or something like that. You'll notice the big screen is actually a projector. It's projecting from up there. There is a an LED screen behind that, and actually everyone always used to say to me, oh, you're so lucky having a studio with natural light, but you'll notice I don't, and that's because I got a bit fed up with the natural light and blocked it all off with panels, which I know is a bit crazy, but I like that kind of endless night feel about the studio, and actually seeing the sunshine, or even worse, actually seeing the rainfall, I found quite irritating and distracting, and so I blocked it out. Unsurprisingly, I was recently told that I had a massive deficiency in vitamin D, which really came as no surprise to anyone, but I just take a supplement for that and that's fine. So everyone's happy. So coming over here, I've shown you the lunchbox. There's a few little synths. So there's the Blofeld, which is a nice little thing. It's wavetable synthesis. It's got a bit of a touch of the 80s about it, but it's very tweakable and fun, and it's going through the Strymon Big Sky, which is just the most phenomenal reverb. I like things going through things, so it's quite nice to just have that as a signal chain, and those two as well. So with that, if I open this up, there's a little bit of hum from this old stuff, but you kind of learn to live with it. So this is very nice to just sort of go, and you can hear that's going through a sort of echoey, reverby setting on there, and it's just very instant, very tweakable and fun, and it sort of goes a bit out of tune and things as it wobbles around. Really nice. And then this little Blofeld thing also is very nice, and I can play that from here. So I should sit down really. So this and you can hear it's got a very, very long reverb on it. It's just the Big Sky. It's just a lovely sound, and it's ready to go. So if I show you, well, I suppose I should show you what's on the front here. You'll know a lot of this stuff. My main monitor controller is made by Crookwood, lovely little sort of boutique British company. This was made to order. It's 5.1 monitoring with 2 inputs, so I can get my DVD player and AV amp that's out there through it as well if I want to watch a DVD. It's also got 5.1 outs and stereo outs, which are going to the Avon tones, which I know a lot of people hate. I find indispensable. Fantastic if I'm trying to get the bass right, especially for TV. I mean, in the cinema, you can get away with anything, but in fact, you're usually just trying to make sure it's not too subby. But for telly, if you want the bass to cut through on a small screen, those I find indispensable. They're good for balancing as well, just if you want to make sure that things aren't too bright, and it's always useful to have 2 sets of speakers, whatever they are, even if it's just a pair of hi-fi speakers, or just route it through the telly. So that's my monitor controller. It allows you to do lots of clever things like fold down to the center and cut things out, and you can get a bass management add-on for it for your sub if you want, but I didn't go for that. So it's pretty basic, but actually really stunning quality, and lovely little bit of boutique kit. And I've got my my DAC for headphones, which Christian Henson recommended to me, which is why you probably would have seen one of those in his crib. Most ludicrously overpriced headphone amp I've ever bought or will ever buy. No idea really why I needed to spend that much for a headphone amp, but it's very nice and it does the job very well. These little things somebody gave to me, but it works really well with Logic and Cubase, and also Pro Tools, and I'll show you a little bit more of what that can do in a minute. Kenton Control Freak, they're fairly ubiquitous as a controller for things like modulation and so swell and things like that. So if you've got some strings, you'd be fairly familiar with that kind of thing. What I've also got here, which is why I got rid of the V piano, is this has been overlaid with a touch keys system, which is made by a guy called Andrew McPherson, who now works for Roley. It's quite similar to the Roley Seaboard, but it's a slightly more solid thing. I like the Roley Seaboard, but I didn't like the 88-note keyboard because it was just too much. I just didn't need a whole 88-note keyboard that I could sort of wobble around on. I'm actually going to get one of their small ones because the new Seaboard Rise is fantastic, and it will fit on the desk, which is nice. But this allows you to do things like this, so you can swell. Just by wandering up the keys, and you can set it to do all sorts of things. So you can put in vibrato, you can do pitch bend, you can move up the y-axis, the x-axis. You can program it to do a lot of stuff, and it still feels like a normal keyboard pretty much. It's not great for doing sweeps like that because it's got this little thing stuck on it, which takes a little bit of your skin off every time you do that, so best not to. But other than that, it's really nice. It works really well on strings, really well on brass. It's very good for solo lines, and it can save a bit of time of just sort of reaching up here. Another thing you'll notice, I had this desk made by John at Studio Racks, and we spent quite a bit of time, and actually I think I have to credit Sam Sim with some of the ideas for this, because we were trying to work out a way of keeping the mouse close by, because we all suffer from terrible RSI from leaning over. And so this moves around. Obviously you can take it off if you're playing up high, and there's a little shelf that they made for me under here. And stow it away, look, no hands. So that's great, and that just allows me to have that as close as possible, and it's made a massive difference to the RSI I used to get from just being over there or over there. So that's a really great thing. What's also nice is if someone comes over to mix, I can cover the whole thing up, and I don't know why I did it in 3 sections. I just thought it was more flexible, which is great because it means then you can bring the keyboard forwards. At some point, this Control Freak's going to go because I can kind of do most of the things I want without it, and I really want to put an Avid S3 there. It's a lovely piece of kit. I borrowed one for a while. I'm going to turn that off because it's squeaking and it's driving me mad. It's a lovely piece of kit. It's a little bit overpriced in my opinion, but it's very, very nice, and it does some amazing things, and I'll be able to have mixing faders and MIDI faders at the same time. At the moment, mixing fader is the fader port. This went through a very long phase of not working, and then I suddenly managed to get it working the other day, which is good. But there's a problem with the firmware, which you might have read about or know about if you have one, where the fader just stops working. But if you keep playing with it, eventually you can bully it into working, and it's really good. When it's working, it's great, which it is at the moment. So I think that's everything that's on the desk. So other than that, really, it's just the template which you might be interested in. So let me show you a bit of that. Basically with the template, as I say, it used to have 500 MIDI tracks all going off to slaves. There were about, I think, 11 or 14 Vienna Ensemble Pro instances. And I could get just about everything from that. Now it's simplified. I keep it simple on the screen. There's a bit more going on behind the scenes. So I've got my video track, temp and sync, so temp music if there is any, and sync track, which I'll bring in from the movie. Then I've got my stereo stem tracks, so the full mix, the keys, strings, synths, percussion and other, which could be brass or it could be guitars. I try and keep it to 5 because I really don't like people messing with more than 5 stems at a time if possible. And those all are mastered independently and then summed to that stereo mix. So I can print those immediately at any time. There's a noise track, which is just some noise that I recorded in the studio. And you won't hear it with the click, but you won't really hear that. But there's a bit of a a room noise. I quite like that, to glue strings together and glue orchestral stuff to make it sound real. I don't always use it, but generally it's there. Click track, obviously, I've just got some strings that I set up literally just to show you the swells on the keyboard, and that's not normally there. And then I've got the MS-20 over there coming in, the SE1, which is fairly ubiquitous in these studios just for sub bass, which is down there in the rack. It looks very pretty, sort of mini Moogie type thing. Again, very nice and sort of easy to play with and make nice sounds with. So it's nice to be able to just tweak that, and it's always in. The Blofeld's in there, and the Juno is coming in as well. And I retrofitted that with MIDI. It's got the Minerva kit in. If you don't know about the Minerva kit, you should Google it. It's phenomenal. It was about, I can't even remember how much it was, a few £100 at most. And the only thing that they don't really tell you, it's worth downloading the manual before you buy it, because you have to solder every pin onto the main chip. So there's about 40 pins to solder onto a chip. You have to solder a socket onto the bottom of the main processor chip. It's one of the most terrifying things I've ever done to a beautiful old vintage synth. And I've now completely trashed it inside, so there's no possible way I could ever sell it, which is also good. But it's fantastic because it gives you some extra patches, full MIDI control. You can sync the arpeggiator, which is one of the best things about the Juno 60, and I think you can do some other things as well. But it's a really amazing kit. So that's coming in there. And that looks like all I've got, and you might sort of wonder how I've managed to get that going to the record tracks. Basically, there's a whole load of stuff going on behind the scenes that I've hidden. So I've got my 5.1 stems here, which are coming up there. So basically, at any point, I can input monitor through either the stereos, or I can turn those off. They're all grouped, or I can listen in 5.1. It's as simple as that, just to listen to one or the other. If I want to record them, arm them and record them, and that's me printing all the stems and my mix in one go. How did they get into those stems? Down here we've got a whole load of reverbs and a whole load of delays, which are for the auxiliaries. Already down here, as I say, they've got altiverbs in them as defaults, and echo boys on the delays. And then there's a surrounder setup here, which is using a mixture of echo boys and lexicon reverbs, which sound beautiful. And that creates a sort of surround for strings and things like that in the back. We've got the sub tracks here, which have got various bits of mastering on them. And then there's the master bus for each of these tracks, which again has got a bit of mastering on each of the stems. Then we have a recording auxiliary which routes it to the right place, and finally the down mixers for the stereos, which takes the 5.1 signal and uses a fairly standard setup to down mix it all to stereo. So all of that's going on behind the scenes. I'd love to take credit for having set that all up myself, but actually it was Jake Jackson at Air who set it up for me, so full credit to him. He did a fantastic job, and it works really, really smoothly, really slickly in the background. You don't ever really see it. And as I say, generally I just hide the whole lot and just look at what I actually want to work with, and it just makes it much neater and much quicker to find your way around. I've also got Vienna Ensemble running locally, so there it is. It's just got a little Malmsey grand piano in there at the moment, and that's got 16 channels and tracks all set up, ready to go. I've got them coming back in on audio tracks, so I can record them and actually just print them which is quite useful. So they're all there. So the first 16 tracks of anything I want to do are all coming basically off one virtual instrument. I've also got in here tracks for the guitar and the Bechstein over there. I should also have, I don't see it right now, oh yeah, here we go. I've also got the hammered dulcimer, which, as I say, isn't a hammered dulcimer anymore because it's now a running machine. It doesn't sound as good as it did when it was a hammered dulcimer, but that has had its own track, and there's mics over there for that, which is a pair of 184s. And then I've also got all of the drum tracks there, which are ready to go, and as you can see, everything's separated, and then I've got its own reverb and a bus with some final mastering, and then I can bounce the whole lot and print it, which you often need to do if you want to just chop things up, or if you want to make sure the timing's really tight with everything else. So a fairly comprehensive template, but not very much in there in terms of music creation. As I say, I've gone against that temporarily. I might go back to it at some point, but for now, I quite like just making a decision on the fly about what instruments I want to use, using a Vienna ensemble, or bringing them straight into Pro Tools. So that's the template. One other thing I'd quite like to talk about is if you're starting out, and I'm guessing that your Hans Zimmer probably isn't watching this going, oh, I wish I worked the way Dru did. More likely that if you're watching this, you're starting out and you're looking at this gear, perhaps slightly enviously, wondering how you'll get to that stage. It took me a long time to get to this point where I have all this gear. And I have to say, it's brilliant, it's lovely, it makes life very, very easy, and it makes things very quick. I think it's really useful to see what people have, but if you watch all of these creative cribs, I've watched them, you'll see that everyone does things in a different way. People have lots of different things. There's some commonality, but there's other things that people don't have, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it. And this is the culmination of a long time doing this job, and this is the dream studio I've always wanted, and I love having all this gear, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily made life a lot easier, but it hasn't made my composition any better than it was, say 15 years ago when I was using a laptop and some very basic samples. I used to have to try a lot harder to make those samples work for me, and I sometimes miss that bit of the process where you work really hard to make something work because you haven't got anything. So now if I want a cello, I'm very likely going to go to the Spitfire solo cello, and that will be my go-to starting point. If that doesn't work for me because maybe there's a bit too much vibrato or something, I might open up a Lass one or a Vienna one. I mean, I've got almost everything there is, and it's great, but in a way it's no more liberating than it is a ball and chain. You use things in quite a general sort of way. You'll try something, doesn't work, you'll try something else. As I say, in the old days, I would have to work really hard to make something work. And sometimes I would have to modify my idea to work with the sounds, which is something I really didn't want to do, but helped me come up with some quite creative solutions. So don't watch this and think, wow, well, I haven't got any barefoots and I don't have a soundproof studio and I don't have that bit of kit or that bit of kit, and think, well, that means I can't do it, because I don't think that's the case at all. And actually, this is a really simplified setup from the one I had before and the one I'll probably have in 6 months' time. But it works really well. Just running something on a laptop or an old PC or anything does work really well. And, it's about what you do with the sounds. I'd say a lot of the stuff, I'm a big fan of Spitfire sounds, as anyone who knows me will know. I mean, I've been using them since the very first bespoke range, and I was one of the few people that had everything from the bespokes. And now I use a lot of Sable, a lot of Albion. I really like those ensemble patches. They're really quick and easy to use. Just use a whole load of the Evo grids on a movie I've just done, because it just sounded really great, and we didn't have budget for real strings, so I used that. It's fantastic. And these libraries are pretty pretty affordable and pretty attainable for most people. And you know, the old days of having to spend thousands and thousands before you got anything that sounded vaguely real have gone. And I think the trick is to be creative with what you've got, and think about the music, and that's more important than the gear, although it's obviously very nice to have it. Let me finish up by just showing you a few other bits and bobs around the studio. I'm very proud of my jump poster. That was my first ever movie, which I did a few years back. It was written and directed by very talented lady called Bindu Distopani, and I'm about to start her next film, which will be fun. Moving around, we've got a lovely photograph of Audrey Hepburn. Very, very tenuous film link there. No really good reason to have it other than it's a lovely photo. Vertigo's on the floor. It's an original poster from the film. That would have been probably in a cinema lobby. I don't really know why it's on the floor, but every time I move it off the floor, I miss it from being down there, so it stayed there. Some of my guitars. That's a beautiful John Suhr guitar. I don't really know why I bought that particular model. I was a bit of a sucker for the greeny blue colour. I keep doing that. I buy the same guitar over and over again. It's usually either a white Strat or a greeny blue guitar. And in fact, the only reason I don't have a Les Paul is because no one will let me buy a blue one. So Rickenbacker bass, which I've loved since my days in the sixth form listening to Stranglers records. Lovely versatile bass, beautifully set up, really well balanced. Wanted one of those a long time. My Mikolev posters, which I love. I'm a big sucker for Mikolev. And then when you come around this side, there's lovely picture of the album cover for an album I produced in Vancouver for a band called Aliqua, who I think are no longer going, but a very nice little vocal group. I did 2 albums for them in Vancouver. Lovely place. Had a lovely time working out there. And then a couple more guitars. It's a Fender Pawn Shop guitar, the greeny one. As I say, I'm a sucker for green guitars. I have no idea why I bought that, other than I thought I'd regret it if I didn't. I've never played it, but it does look nice. And of course the Jaguar, which I also never play because it's a little bit noisy in this room. The John Suhr is totally silent in here. The humbuckers are fantastic on it. That's got humbuckers, but it just doesn't sound as exciting as the John Suhr. And the John Suhr is so in tune. The problem with working with samples all day, as people watching this will probably know, is that you become very, very focused on tuning. And if I have an original Fender Strat or Tele, as I move around the neck, the intonation's going to move, and I literally have to hold a chord down and retune the guitar because it just bothers me so much if it's not perfectly in tune. My fingers aren't strong enough to bend each note in tune. So I love the John Suhr for that. And the last thing I think you'll notice is that there are a couple of skateboards over there. The really lovely girls from Aliqua gave me that one when I went and produced their first album. I have a habit of telling people that I can skateboard, and no one's ever proved that I can't. So I've got another one there. I've actually got 3 or 4 others in the storage room, and then a couple that I keep in LA. I think that I've probably got about 6 or 7, which I reckon is 6 or 7 too many for a man my age. However, I do like them. It does feel a bit like it's a little nod to my youth. So that's it, really. I think that's pretty much everything. Hope you enjoyed the tour. Hope you learned something interesting, and thanks for watching.